Well, this time of year when our spring and summer beds are in transition, it's nice to have a spot of color on the deck. And today in Oklahoma Gardening, we want to talk about container culture. And right here is a good example of what I'm talking about. We've just taken out our spring pansies and replaced them with scaevola for the summertime, so it looks a little bare right now. So thank goodness for all these beautiful plants that we have put in containers here on the deck. It gives us a lot of color and greenery. And I wanted to talk about the basics of how to grow things in containers so you can have good success. And let's start with the very basics, and that's the pots that you use. Now, a lot of us love to use clay pots, and there's a reason they're called terracotta. That means baked earth, and it really is simply that. It's just a special clay that has been found at certain deposits around the earth and formed into pots. But the quality of them varies considerably, and so if you're going to invest in clay pots, especially the really large, expensive terracotta ones, make sure that you choose ones that are high quality. And I want to give you an example of that right now. This, from the surface, looks like a pretty nice pot, but if you take a look up close, you'll find that it has a crack around it. Also, if you look around it, there are some little lime deposits. Now, these are little specks that might not look too serious, and they're just little white specks in here, but lime absorbs water more rapidly than the clay, and that's a perfect site for flaking to occur in the cooler parts of the year. And so this is probably not the highest quality of pots. And over here we also have an example for how to pick out a nice pot. This of course is one we've had around the garden for a while, and it has a lot of mineral deposits on it, but also it has some cracks in it, and if you hold it by the top and just bang it, it has a very dull, kind of a dull flat sound. Whereas if you take a new pot that has no cracks and is in good shape and you bang it, it rings. So it's sort of like picking out china or crystal. You want a nice quality pot so it'll last you a while. Now, the dimension of pots makes a difference as well, especially with the clays, because they are very porous, and that's one advantage with growing plants in them, is that there's good air exchange with the root system. But in Oklahoma they do dry out very quickly, so you want to get a pot that's going to not only drain well but also be insulated against the heat. Now, this pot, even though it has a crack, has fairly thick sides, which is a sign of good quality in one respect. It'll be a good insulator against the heat. Now, if you have a pot that is fairly short, and right here's an example, it's not going to drain quite as well as a taller pot, and a lot of people call these azalea pots. A standard pot is going to be a little bit taller than that. In fact, it will be the same height as it is across, and this is slightly shorter, and it's better for succulents such as this right here, and using a mix that is fairly sandy so it will drain well. And this is an example that all of us who went through horticulture always got from Professor Mitchell, and that is the idea of a shallow versus a deeper pot and how well they drain. If you look at these sponges right here and the amount of water coming off, a long horizontal pot, like the terracotta pot that I walked in with, doesn't drain water very rapidly, but one that is long and narrow drains pretty readily. And so just the physics of the way the soil is packed in there, horizontal versus vertical, makes a difference on drainage. So if you've had trouble with poor drainage, consider that fact as well. Also, you want to consider the medium that you're using. Now, I mentioned in a more shallow pot using succulents, you want a sandy mix that drains well. We have compost in this container right here, and it seems to be working out just fine. Back here, this is a plastic pot that we have this asparagus fern in, and any other real ferns such as Boston fern and so forth are probably going to be better off in a plastic pot versus a clay pot, because the moisture will be held in a little bit longer. You still want to pay attention to getting a quality mix though, and here's a good example of what I'm talking about. This is a hanging basket that one of our staff members potted up this spring for their patio, and they used not a standard greenhouse potting mix that has perlite and vermiculite in it for good drainage. They used a highly humus-based mix, and it's very, very heavy. When it drains out, it leaches out tannins that are staining their deck, and in fact there seem to be some salts built up in it that are causing problems with these petunias. And so you do want to pay attention to having a high quality mix. As I mentioned, just a standard greenhouse mix is probably going to be adequate for most containers. You also want to allow ahead of time though for having some fertilization. We like to use coated time-release fertilizer such as Osmocote or other brands and work that into the mix ahead of time. Then each time you water, a little bit of fertilizer will be released. Your other option is to always be mixing up some liquid water-soluble fertilizer throughout the season. Last of all, I want to mention that there are a lot of options with plastics now, that they aren't all just the round white pot or the round black plastic pot. These are some nice patio pots that are made of plastic, have a drainage hole in the bottom. You want to make sure you pull those plugs out so it does drain well. And they come in a range of colors and sizes. Now again, this plastic, even though it looks real sturdy, is not going to resist the heat quite as well as the terracotta because it is a little bit thinner walled. But this color will probably stand up better in the heat than a solid black would. One other thing you might look for is on the bottom of plastic pots or saucers or support materials, sometimes in the fine print it will say that it has been UV stabilized, and if it has stabilizers in it to prevent breakdown from ultraviolet light, then you know it's a higher quality plastic and it's going to last a little bit longer. Now this is a neat gadget. If you've had trouble with putting container grown materials directly on the ground, you may have had trouble with sow bugs or pill bugs coming up and eating your roots. This is a plant stand that was mailed to us a few years ago. You can lay it flat like this in your house to prevent the carpet from getting a ring on it from where the saucer or the pot sits, or you can place it on the deck like this and it elevates the plant up away from the surface and prevents some problems with sow bugs or pill bugs or slugs, and so that might be helpful as well. Let's get to some of the planting styles and give you some tips on things that you can put in your pots on your patio. So let's walk on over here and take a look at our first one. We really found some beautiful terracotta this spring, and this is some Italian terracotta, and it has a very nice feel and nice quality to it. This is a nice combination when you're planting container grown stock. It's nice, or plants in containers, it's nice to have a feel for both height and some round materials, and then also add some trailing materials. And that's what we've done right here with this species of Dracaena in the center, and then petunias around the edge, and those will fall over the edge and cascade and fill that in nicely. Now out here, this is not a container for putting on our deck, but it is a nice hanging basket and a good example of using a mix of materials. In the very center, we have asparagus fern. Then around the edges we have a rounded form of two colors of petunias. We also have some blue days mixed in right here, as well as at the back here we have some Nerimbergia and a little bit of English ivy, and that's going to fill in and be just beautiful. Now we have to water these every day, so think about keeping container plants around your deck. It's going to be a little bit like having a cat or a dog. They need to be watered every day. Back over here, you might consider using some woody plants on the deck. This is Hopi variety, and it's a trailing form of crepe myrtle, and that's going to be just beautiful as the season goes on. We're getting some new growth on it. This has not been in the pot very long, so it's looking a little rough initially, but I think it's going to fill in very nicely. Then back around the front here, for a more formal appearance, you might consider training a lantana to a standard. This is all one plant. It's been growing here for a number of years, and you can do this just by buying a small lantana at your local nursery and slowly training it to a single stem. And they've taken an old stem to tie it to for support. You'd need a bamboo stake or something like that, and then you start letting it fill out at the top. Keep it clipped back and so forth, and it gives you a beautiful formal appearance, very, very heat tolerant. So this is a good one for Oklahoma. I do want you to notice down at the bottom how we've dressed the pot out a little bit, again to help hold in moisture, keep the heat levels down, but also give it a little more formal appearance. We've used some cottonseed hulls. You could do the same thing with some sphagnum peat moss or some other material to give it a nice finished look. Even some pecan shells or some other mulch would look nice as well. Well, on over here, don't neglect the standard garden flowers. This is a straw flower or helichrysum, and with plants like this, keep in mind that you want to make sure that you deadhead and take the old flowers off. In fact, of course, this being a straw flower, you could be cutting those and drying them and having some everlastings to use in winter arrangements as well. We like to use ornamental grasses in containers, and this one looks a little bit lonesome all by itself, but it is going to fill in and really fill that up well. You could, if you want, however, to have an ornamental grass in the center, and then put some trailing material over the sides, such as verbena or some trailing petunias. Pay attention to color combinations when you're looking at containers materials as well. Then we have a small zinnia here, and then coupled with that we have some purple scaevola. And blue and orange are opposites on the color wheel. They look really nice together, but to cool it down, we have a plant with a little bit of silvery foliage, and this is a species of Gazania daisy. It also looks very nice just by itself in a pot with the silvery foliage and bright yellow colors. The silver and yellow go together as well. Back here we have a mandevilla vine. And even though you might think of just planting this directly in the ground and up a trellis, if you live in an apartment and don't have room to plant something, you can still have one. Just put it in a large clay container, fill it with a well-drained potting mix, and then take a scrap of lattice material. This is left over from a project we had a couple years ago. We put a stake in to support it, and there you have a nice container-grown vine for your deck. Right here we have some osteospermum, which is a fairly new plant that we got in from White Flower Farm this spring. And you don't have to go with multiple colors in a container either. You can go with just variegated. And this looks very nice and fresh with the shiny green cream edge and then some dark green asparagus fern at the back. Right here is a combination that we also like. This gray looking plant is actually in the same genus as the straw flower that we looked at a moment ago. It's Helichrysum petiolarum, and it's called the licorice plant. And if you crush the foliage, it actually has a slight licorice scent to it. But the silvery gray of it looks very nice with the petunias. Right here we have ornamental grasses again, and then we've taken some lantana. This is variegated lantana with a bright yellow flower with variegated leaf. Couple that with a dark blue petunia, and then added it to this lotus vine. It's Lotus bertheloti. It's a fairly new plant, but again an excellent container plant, and it almost looks like a blue atlas cedar or something growing in there. It looks really nice together. Here we have flowering tobacco, and again that new Helichrysum that we have mixed together in this pot. Back over here, again, don't neglect the woody plants. To go with our new paint job on the barn, Steve found this great smoke tree that matches the trim of our barn. It's sort of a dark burgundy color. And down below we have filled in with some blue petunias and then some variegated vinca to go over the edge. Down here we're using Swan River daisies coupled with the lotus vine, and it gives sort of a ferny texture. And the back here is a real workhorse in the garden. We have some Goldstrom rudbeckia, and that by itself is going to be stunning in this dark red terracotta as those yellow flowers come on out. Well, on up here is one of our favorites, and we're getting a lot of comments on this in the studio garden. This is Angel's Trumpet. And it's an outstanding plant, has wonderful fragrance at night. And in this sand-colored pot, the white and the darker beige just makes a nice combination. It's sort of a cooling look on the deck. Down here, you can do something as simple as direct seeding some dwarf zinnias, and that's what we've done right here. So if you just have a package of zinnia seeds sitting around, it's a dwarf type, consider sowing that directly into a pot, and then you're not out the expense of buying some plants from the nursery. Last of all, think about scrap materials that you have around your property that you can put together. This is a clay pot that has a Gerbera daisy in it, but to add a cooling effect and to help us get through the season, we've taken scrap lumber that's left over from our deck, and we've used these a lot over the years on Oklahoma Gardening, but it's always fun to show them again. And it's just pieces of lumber and has some square blocks on the corners to stabilize it. And we just stack those up over the plant, and that gives it a tie-in with our deck material, gives it a little more of a contemporary look. And it's surprising how insulating this wood is around there, so we don't have to water quite as often. By the way, if you are going on vacation and you don't have people coming to your house every day to take care of pets, you're going to have to consider how to get your container plants watered. It will help if you'll shift them to a shady area, group them all together, water them really well, maybe pack some straw around the outside of them and other materials as well to help hold in moisture. Last of all, we wanted to mention some neat color that's come about on our deck area this spring. We thought it was an excellent combination using the dwarf snapdragons and then some blue fescue around them for a softening effect. This again is a combination that you could do in a container on your deck as well. Well, have fun with containers around your house this year and just let your imagination run wild.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.